Good evening, everyone. We're back on the video format tonight, and it's my pleasure to receive some feedback from the blog readership and viewership. I received some feedback the other day that I was chewing in one of the posts, and that was very distracting, so I will certainly not do so in the future. And if anyone has any other feedback as to how to conduct the video portion in terms of either content-wise or even presentation-wise in any other way, please let me know. Again, this is the point is to get everyone involved and to have people thinking about these issues. So whatever format does that for everyone, that is great. So today we're going to talk about work. We're going to return to the subject of work. And I think that one subject I wanted to talk about, it's hard to really talk about work in contemporary America anymore without getting into the subject of specialization and or whether to be a generalist, which is increasingly the minority selection, the minority route for most people. You just cannot have any sort of sustained discussion of work in America or in most other developed countries without discussing that issue. And it's not an issue that's only specific to medicine, which we're going to talk about today in the book that we're going to discuss, John McPhee's The Errors of General Practice. Just make sure it's not just a subject in medicine, but similarly in law. There's a lot of debate as to specialization. Lawyers are certainly encouraged to specialize in certain fields, niche fields. I know it's an issue in academia where professors specialize often, for example, in philosophy departments. You can see, professors are specializing in maybe 100 or 200 years of philosophy, or maybe 3 or 4 philosophers in different departments. For example, in psychology, you would have someone focusing on social psychology, and then someone else the psychology of depression or schizophrenia or whatever. So there's undoubtedly, throughout the professions and even in the business world, there is a strong push towards specialization. And there's a lot of factors, and of course there's been a lot of benefits. And I think Adam Smith was probably one of the first to talk about what specialization does in a capitalist economy, how people that specialize tend to be able to produce more of a certain quantity of work in a faster time period by doing things repetitively, and the economy benefits for that. So there's certainly been benefits to specialization which we cannot ignore. And of course, certain fields just cannot be done competently without someone that's specialized in that field. So, for example, a heart surgeon, it's hard to imagine being able to do the very complicated surgical procedures in that field without specializing in it. So, as with almost every topic we talk about here, this is not intended to be a bash against specialization, although we will certainly probe some of the potential or possible drawbacks of specialization. So with that, let's talk more about John McPhee's book. And so one thing, just as a general background, the book is a sort of largely anecdotal collection of recounting of about 10 or 12 doctors, general practitioners, general family doctors' experiences in rural Maine. I think about 30 or 40 years ago. The book was published, by the way, in 1984, so it's somewhat dated and shouldn't be sort of understood as giving the most up-to-date information on some of these topics. But it's still certainly in a blog devoted to universal discussions of human subjects. We can certainly gain insights from it. But anyway, getting back to the book, so McPhee here traces the career paths of several highly motivated, highly credentialed general practitioners. These were doctors that graduated from some of the top schools in the country, had certainly many options to specialize, but decided, each one of them, for various reasons, not to become a specialist. And it was, for each of them, I think it was primarily a sort of principled decision. It wasn't just they couldn't become a specialist, or they didn't, they tried to become a specialist and they couldn't do it, so they fell back to being a general doctor. This was something that was a principled decision. It was something that came from who they were. It was something that embodied sort of core life decisions and life values, core views of the world, core perspectives about the person they wanted to fashion. All of this was bound up in this one decision of their work and whether they were going to be a generalist or specialist. And of course, to some extent, that's a very important point right there. In a world where people are working 9 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then sometimes even on the weekends, it's hard to imagine that your decision as to what you're going to do career-wise in that many hours a week is not going to self-fashion you in some very significant way. So to the extent we could probably put this both in self-creation, self-knowledge, because this kind of decision is so critical to who you become. And so let's look at a couple passages here to see sort of what we can learn about what drew these individuals into being generalists, general family doctors, and what are some of the sort of attributes, some of the virtues of being a generalist, why it would be attractive to us or someone. And so on page 31, McPhee quotes a doctor by the name of Sandy Bernstein, and actually he quotes Bernstein's friend David Jones, who says Sandy could have been good at anything. Again, so it wasn't. He made a decision to be a generalist. It wasn't a fallback, as is kind of assumed sometimes. Sandy could have been good at anything, surgery, psychiatry, but he is perfect for family practice. He is low pressure, low key. He does not compromise his own values as he goes along. Seeing healthy kids, sick adults, you have to be on top of so many things. You can't sit in one little niche and know everything about it, as people in some subspecialties can. It's a very interesting statement there. You can't sit in one little niche and know everything about it. So obviously it's somewhat of a negative characterization or pejorative characterization, but it's hinting that a specialist in some way or another can at some point in their career just sit there, just sit on his laurels in a very carved out niche, and one of 2 or 3 people in the world that does that sort of thing. We're exaggerating, but generally the point is, the specialist has carved out this area that's so fine-tuned that he can just sit back on his laurels, and for some people that's not attractive, and that's not the kind of person they want to become. Another doctor here, we have Dr. West, and West writes about he writes down when he's in medical school his founding or his core principles for being a doctor, which is, I think, very admirable to do something like that. And he says, actually, I'm sorry, this is a doctor by the name of Foreman. He said he wanted to develop a well-rounded understanding of medicine so that he could approach the patient as a whole person whose physical problems often arise from emotional and social causes. He wished to teach people about their own health, allay their fears about mild problems, counsel and guide them through seemingly complex treatment regimens where their problems are more serious, all in the context of a compassionate, high-quality medicine. He wanted to seek a place where he was really needed in order to avoid being just another specialist competing for a limited number of cases. And he particularly hoped to find it in an area with high mountains, cold white winters, and people who love and respect the natural resources available to them. He wrote that 10 years ago when he was 25. Now he and his family live on a smoothly scraped dirt road and own 23 acres of high forested land. So in this passage we see sort of a contrast of the specialist who's sort of competing with a lot of different specialists who are in a sort of usually an urban area. I guess this is sort of being portrayed here. They're competing for a limited number of cases, whereas there's this huge need that the generalist is going somewhere, and the generalist is able to address a much more fundamental need of people because he's not competing in that sense for a very limited selection of cases, but he's going to where the need is. We get another description of the generalist, sort of the virtues of the generalism. Well, this is sort of, again, sometimes it's in a pejorative attack on specialists. And we have a quote here from a doctor that's unnamed. Quote, with remarkable perceptiveness, 100 years ago, Dostoevsky satirically forecast the day when a medical specialist in problems of the right nostril would refer patients whose problems on the left side. So that's sort of an interesting bureaucratic, again, description that people have become so specialized that Dostoevsky at least thought even back then that if you had, you would, even different sides of a nostril, the nose, would cause you to have to go to a different specialist. And again, that may not be appealing to some people to do that. We get here, let me see here. Now, one of the reasons I think that we can say that people have not become specialists is that in some ways it's not been, one of the reasons people have not become generalists is because it's not really encouraged. Is sort of the thought that McPhee has here, especially in medical schools. And I think that's probably true of law schools to some extent, although I haven't studied it to make a definitive conclusion. But here he cites, I think, someone that went to Harvard Medical School, and talking about it, he says, traditionally the Harvard mission has been to train leaders in academic medicine. Leaders in academic medicine do not go to Maine. In Amphitheater E at Harvard Medical School, our professors always saying something like, in this lecture hall sat Louis Diamond, who outlined the problem of Rh incompatibility between mother and child. One of you will make such a discovery too. They never say to us, one of you will go out and become the best doctor some little town ever had. That is never said at Harvard Medical School, never will be said. Harvard does not have a family practice department. Again, I don't know if these statements are true. Statements were made in 1984, but again, as to one of the reasons why people may not be choosing generalism or any career path is that it's not encouraged. It's not placed as a model for people to follow. So people have to have strong. If you want to become a generalist, you have to have that sort of strong internal drive for it, because you're not going to find much encouragement along the way to do that. Now, some of the problem with any sort of career choices, and it applies to this one with being a generalist or a specialist, is understanding what the terms mean. And I think McPhee does a good job here of bringing out that a generalist, while he's doing a lot of different things in medicine, he also is not Superman. You know, he quotes here this doctor who says, "The good pilots know when to choose not to fly, know their own limitations and the limitations of their craft, and are unembarrassed by their decisions." And then he quotes another doctor here, David Axelman, who says, you know, you shouldn't think, no generalist should be thinking that they're Superman. So that's sort of, I guess, a fear that some people would have about being a generalist is, well, I have to do everything. I have to, you know, figure out how to do X, Y, Z, and then A through whatever. And he's saying that no, you know, at least even in general practice, being a doctor, you're perfectly free to refer cases to specialists, and you don't have to do everything yourself. Let's see if I can get another. So one of the, obviously, if we're talking about whether to become a generalist or specialist, and here, of course, today we're not talking about specializing. One of the questions is, what is it that, what are the virtues of being a generalist? What are, and in terms of how, specifically on that, what is the meaning that one can get out of being a generalist beyond what one would get in that same field as being a specialist? And I think meaning is always a difficult question in terms of work because, again, it's not something that, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all. People have different ways of creating meaning in work and in all aspects of their life. So it's certainly what we're going to say here, probably not going to apply in each case in the same way, although it probably has some applicability. But one way, obviously, to create meaning in work, through work of any type, is, and I think we've hinted at it before, and that way is to connect with people, obviously. You know, have a job or a career, you know, daily work that brings you into contact with people's problems. And it seems like in that sense, and not just, and problems of many different types. You know, you can, the specialist, I guess, in this sense, maybe, only be responding to people's very particular needs. Only once in a while, you know, how often are you going to need specific type of surgery, or how often are you going to need, you know, a specific type of cancer operation, something like that. It's going to be much less than how often you're going to need just to see your doctor, your general doctor, about basic things, colds and flus and stuff like that. And so I think one theme that comes out here is that these generalist doctors, they find meaning in their work just through the interaction with people and listening. And let's go through some of these passages here where we can get a sense of that. One of the doctors says here that basically he has, you know, patients coming in just for, especially if they're older, just for reassurance that they're okay. You know, they don't really have any particular medical problem, but they just want to be told that things are okay. And so he does that and gains meaning from that. Here, I really like this passage here. I really enjoyed this one. This is a doctor by the name of Jones, and he's meeting. He has a patient that's a little older, and 77, and she's got hypertension, and he wants to put her on a diet. And he told her to go on a diet, and then the patient was very worried about complying with all the diet, and she was asking the doctor, can she have biscuits and ice cream? And he thought about it a little bit, and he said, yeah, you can go ahead and have those things. And then he tells, I think he's telling McPhee later, quote, when people pass a certain age, the diets you impose should not be too restrictive. Eating is important, and it's one of the few recreations some older people have. You see how much she wanted a biscuit. If it keeps her cholesterol slightly elevated, what's lost? A lot is gained. I think we get hung up sometimes running things by the book. The doctor can get too aggressive and upset the apple cart, do a lot of damage. People can be worse off than before he started doing anything. So I was, again, touching people, and responding to needs, being perceptive to what people's situation is, and that making sort of a humane decision here that, it might be better for her not to have those biscuits, but in the grand scheme of her diet and her health, it's not going to make a huge difference, a biscuit or an ice cream, and in fact could do her harm. So that's sort of one source of meaning, is really getting fine-tuned to the sort of human sense of life that I think the generalist could perhaps gain more than the specialist. Here we have we have a doctor saying he doesn't charge his neighbors. He didn't feel right doing that. It'd be hard to think of the specialist in a big hospital in the city doing that. Although, again, everything is subject to exceptions. He says here, I don't charge my neighbors. I don't feel right doing that. And then his driveway runs through woods in which the eye threads its way to visible clearings. He pauses for a few minutes after making the turn and says, to have a place like this was always my dream. As a physician, you can go somewhere else and make more money, but you can't live like this. You walk up on that knoll, you see Mount Cadane. I'd love to be a trapper in Alaska. This is my compromise. Again, somewhat romantic, but the idea that he's finding meaning in his work. He's not charging his neighbors. He feels in tune with his community. All very good things. Here we have, Berdenstein, one of the doctors, talking about his family practice, and he says, what is most interesting in family practice is not what the problem is, but what motivates people to seek help for it. Something in the family, a hidden factor, will make the mundane interesting. If you're a cardiologist, you know your patient has a heart problem when the patient comes through the door. When someone comes to a family doctor, the doctor is starting from scratch. There can be underlying components, psychological or social. The purpose is to help people in a deep and personal way. That's a great formula right there. The purpose is to help people in a deep and personal way. I was attracted from the beginning to the variety of things family doctors do. And I liked the people I saw going into family practice. He says, I'm not always sure it was the right choice. Life might be easier if I were a respected urologist. So again, certainly not not to romanticize this, and I don't think McPhee does. There's obviously doubts everyone has about whether their chosen life was better. There's always the conception that people are doing better, or the grass is greener on the other side, all of those sort of ways to express the same thought. But in general, he says that he gets his meaning from helping people in that deep and personal way. It's not attending as the specialist would do to just sort of a small area, but sort of having a broad understanding of what's motivating people to come in, psychological, social, personal, and helping in that same way, helping in ways beyond ordinary medicine. And then we have here, let's see, another this is Dr. Alexander McPhedran, and he says, people who go into family practice experience real joy in dealing with people and have a sense of wanting to be generalists. They also have a tremendous sense of obligation to community, which is much less true of surgeons and internists. You'll find the family practitioners out there on the athletic fields in the afternoons, as school sports doctors. You'll find them running things at the PTA. They're into the community, and they're willing to have lesser incomes. consider whether, being a generalist, perhaps working less hours, perhaps making a trade on income would still allow you to be more involved in your community, would make you more public spirited because you're tending to many more people, you have patients across a broader range of the community, and you're dealing with their problems in a much more holistic way. Whether that would, just consider whether that would make you more public spirited. It seems like it might. It could. Again, here, the meaning coming from here, another doctor just listening to the patient. Quote, she's here just to talk. She's the patient, as she has been in the past and will be in the future. And he, the doctor, is more than prepared to listen. Two relatives of her husband live in her home. Each is retarded and needs quite special care. As time has passed, the situation has grown in various ways less tolerable to her. There is nothing the doctor can prescribe except his time, his interest, and his watchful sympathy, all of which she receives. Some of the doctors really seem to just delight in the variety of patient that they see, which I think is another source of meaning for them. And of course, some of this is due to their living in a very rural area in Maine. But one doctor talks about a patient that comes in who tries to take off casts with chainsaws, and another talks about patients that come in that have chores to do on a family barn, feeding calves, milk, hay, and grain. So again, the types of patients specialists probably would not see in the city. So I think I think we've gotten sort of a good flavor, at least, of some of the attributes of what it could be to be a generalist. I don't think these ideas are unique to medicine. I think if they're true, and again, it's probably different. It's important to emphasize it. Books like this, where the author is sort of doing vignettes of 10 or 12 or 13 doctors, general practitioners, can hardly be conceived as sort of a comprehensive study of all generalists at all times in different professions. It's not. The book is 30 years old. It's dealing in generalists in Maine. So it's dangerous to sort of make too broad of a conclusion from this. But on the other hand, you need to make some conclusions at some point when you read anything. The weight of the conclusions might always be subject to debate. You may have to revise your conclusions. But if you just read a book like this and say, oh, well, it's just 12 doctors in Maine, I'm not going to make any conclusions, then it's sort of, what's the point of reading anything? So I think at some point you have to make some generalizations, but also be, of course, mindful of limitations of those generalizations. But from this, I gained personally an understanding of how first of all, sort of pursuing the generalist path is something that has to be driven from sort of a core belief, and you have to have deep sort of intrinsic motivation to do it, because there's going to be too many people telling you to specialize. There's going to be too many forces operating against being a generalist. So you have to really want it. And the second point, you have to want it because in some significant way, you think it's going to give you more meaning in your life, through your work. That specialization is not providing you that meaning, or is not likely to provide you that meaning. But you think that being a generalist could. And one of the ways, at least in McPhee's book with these doctors, is it did provide some of them with meaning, was interaction with many different people, many different, from all different walks of life, variety and challenge and practice. A lot of the doctors were treating people with all different sorts of issues. We didn't really go into that as much, but that was throughout the book. I mean, from pregnancies to simple flus, to back operations, to people with cancer, to almost every single medical issue, and these doctors got sort of exposure to all of them, and a feeling that exposure to different things, variety in the types of people you interact with, variety in the challenge and the tasks that you perform and the problems you're addressing, and a sort of a deeper commitment perhaps to the community you live in, perhaps. That by being a generalist, by being respected as a generalist, by coming into contact with so many people and also responding to their needs in sort of a human way, in a personal way, beyond just the strictures of the craft that you're practicing, that all of that sort of engagement in the work area then sort of spills over into wanting to be commit to the social life of the city, the social life of the town, or wherever you're living. And if people are interested in that, that might be another reason to pursue a career that's more generalist in orientation. And so I think one question that we might want to think about more is who is ultimately who is contributing more to society? Is it the generalist, or is it the specialist, or is it impossible to answer that question? So in some sense we could say the generalist might be contributing more to the welfare of the city because he's interacting with many different people, he's touching their needs in many different areas, and because of that his work is more influential. He's doing more good. On the other hand, the specialist might be addressing some extremely important, high-intensity, urgent issue that no one else could deal with. And of course, any life saved is precious. So in that sense, it might be a question that is just hard to answer. I think at some point, though, each of us has to sort of decide, make some decision as to this sort of generalist specialist debate. Even if we are specialized somewhat to begin with, we may decide we don't want to become further specialized, because that's going to take us further away from people and from interaction with a broad range of issues, and we don't want to just sit, as one of the doctors says, sit in a niche and just work on a few different things. That's not what we're interested in. So I think the generalist it could, in some cases, benefit from sort of a lot of different things that may be very useful to having a very productive work career, and that would spill over, obviously, into a more productive and happy and fulfilled life. So I think with that, we'll end with McPhee's book, and also wish everyone a good week. Okay, bye-bye.